Adventurers, welcome back to the Elder Scrolls Lorecast. This is Tom and Lotus, as usual, and today we are diving into yet another creation story because, yes, that is actually the way that Elder Scrolls works. There isn't just one version of the way creation works because everybody comes from different perspectives and different cultures, just like in the real world. Crazy how that works. And today we're digging into the Argonian, or digging into is probably more for Dwemer because they're usually underground.
Nice.
So maybe we're growing into this new
one? I mean, you would dig a hole to put a tree if you wanted to replant it.
Yeah, we're planting some seeds. Now, those seeds were planted very long ago.
Yeah, they're old. They're very old.
We're digging up the seeds. We're digging out the roots. I don't know.
I don't like where any of these metaphors are going.
Some of these will make sense in a minute, but welcome back. Lotus, how's it going? Welcome back to the show.
Things are good. Excited to get into some more weirdness as we've put the more normal creation background stories at the start.
Normal. Because any of them are not
now
weird.
They're getting real weird.
Yeah.
I hope you like sentient trees.
Yeah, it's like we start with weird, and then it just gets weirder from there.
Weirder, right?
Because anytime you talk about gods and things beyond the ken of the mortals, then ken is such a fun word to use as an American English speaker because we don't ever use that word. Anyway,
yeah, I think that's the first time I've actually ever heard just a generic American use that in a sentence.
Right. All right,
good work.
Welcome back to the show, everybody. Welcome back, chat. Everybody's here hanging out, and let's dig into this. Okay, so just a reminder: the way that we are doing this is different from probably what you've seen across other formats on YouTube or a podcast or whatever. We're not just going to say, okay, this is what the Argonians believe, this, and this. No, we're going back to the source. And the source, or at least one of the sources for the things the Argonians believe, because all the sources are a little bit different and sometimes they add things, sometimes they contradict. But one of the sources that gets right to the root of what's going on with the Argonians' understanding.
There's going to be a lot of tree puns.
Oh man, of creation is Children of the Root, transcribed by Solus Aduro. This is one of those in-game books, just like all the other ones we've been referencing in the most recent episodes. And we're going to go to the source. We're going to go through this. We're going to read it. We're going to break it down. We're going to talk about what we think it seems to mean, what its place in the lore is, how this all works. And we're also going to give you some meta information around this. Like, this is one of the later books that was added to the whole list of things that we've been using recently. This one is by Andrew Young. He's the writer who works at Bethesda for Elder Scrolls Online, Murkmire. So this was added in during that expansion. And if you're probably some of the audience, some of the internet out there would go, well, wait a minute, that's not a mainline game. How do you know that's canon? Well, guess what? Elder Scrolls Online is absolutely canon. And at this point, there's more lore from Elder Scrolls Online than from all the other mainline games added together.
I know, that's actually a little weird. And this is one of these scenarios that kind of clarifies a bit on some stuff. Whereas where the Argonians started in the series as to where the Argonians have ended up in the series is vastly, vastly changed. Even if you don't want to get into the Elder Scrolls Onlines and, some of that spin-off things, just in general, looking all the way back to the Elder Scrolls 1 Arena, you had lizard mans. And now we have a fully designed culture with like a background and like a religious structure and all this stuff. So this is definitely one of the races that I think is pretty unique and really, really strange in a lot of ways that I think makes them very cool.
Right. And to kind of fill in the gaps here, you might be asking the question, why aren't you pulling one of the books from one of the original game, one of the mainline games, and using that instead of a more recent entry like Murkmire from Elder Scrolls Online, which is still a number of years old at this point.
Yeah, I was going to say that's not new.
Why not go back to Morrowind? A lot of the great lore books come from Morrowind, or at least Oblivion, right? Maybe even Daggerfall. But there just isn't that much about Argonian creation myths and gods and those kinds of things from those older games. There are some, but there's nothing as detailed as this this work here. And part of it's because those other games did not focus on that region of the world. They did not focus on Argonians particularly to any large degree. There was secondary characters like being slaves in Morrowind and that kind of thing.
Right. Also, the spin-off game that would relate to Argonians, the Eye of Argonia, never came out. So
we didn't get that either.
There's also that.
Yeah.
There's another potential Travels game that we've yet to ever see.
Right. So instead we get this, which I think is a great source because it does a few things. It gave, from a meta perspective, it gave the developers more time to kind of flesh out what's actually going on with Argonians. They do stand apart from the other mythologies. So the things that we're about to discuss are going to sound only sort of similar to the other creation myths that we've talked about, to Daedra and Aedra and all of that kind of stuff, which is normally where the discussion goes. But it's also interesting because it was specifically written for a section of the world where you actually dive into these cultures and you actually go visit this place where they live in ESO. And so you get more of those details and everything kind of feels more cohesive and intentional rather than trying to stitch little details together from old games. So
right.
That's why we're going with this. And as with this and other topics that we've done recently, we'll probably be revisiting this and some of the other side works and things like that in the future. So stay tuned for that. But here, let's get into it. Children of the Root, transcribed by Solus Aduro, an Argonian creation myth from the Adzi Costleal tribe. That's important. So first of all, this is an Argonian creation myth, but it's also from the perspective of this one tribe as transcribed through Solus Aduro. Solus Aduro, I don't have a whole lot of information on other than the fact that he wrote a number of other books, including The Accord with Those Sunblessed, Lost Tales of the Famed Explorer, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, The Call Beyond, The Last Wish of the Sunblessed, and The Way of the Shadow, and is clearly not an Argonian. So this,
I was about to say, and in case it was lost on anyone, not an Argonian name.
Not an Argonian name. So this is from a specific Argonian tribe, transcribed through somebody else to us in the game world, to us outside of the game world. So multiple layers of abstraction here. Just keep that in mind. But here, let's get into it. We're going to read through the whole thing, and Lotus is going to comment as we go, and we'll kind of discuss things. So here we go. Note. It starts with a note. Collected by researcher Solus Aduro from an oral tradition of the Adzi Costleal tribe and not otherwise attested. So not only is this from a tribe, but it's from an oral tradition. This is not a story that was written down by them. So that means oral traditions constantly change. They're always in flux. That's the way it works in the real world.
Also, I mean, not that they're not without value, but it's, as we know, eyewitness accounts and stuff like that, not the most reliable. So when you start playing games of telephone with historical situations, let's say, some of their accuracy is going to get skewed for dramatic effect, let's just say.
Right. Anytime you hear oral tradition and the understanding of ancient texts, basically what that means is before it got written down in that version of the text, they played telephone through history. So not only everyone that goes back through, but even the individual storytellers over their lifetimes would have shifted the details. So imagine playing telephone for hundreds or thousands of years. Some of those details are going to remain, but a lot of them are going to get really, really weird really quick. So just keep that in mind. But here, let's get into it officially at this point. There was first only Atak, A-T-A-K, the Great Root. So it starts not even with a plant, just the root of a plant, a great root. It knew of nothing but itself, so it decided to be everything. It grew and grew, trying to fill the nothing with itself. As it grew, it formed new roots, and these roots took names, and they wanted space of their own to grow. This immediately sounds very similar to some of the other myths we've talked about.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got Anu and Padme, and this idea of like Anu and Padme and this conflict tension between them, and then the two of them come together in some of these other myths, and then because they come together, they're filling, in the case of this, it's like a great root filling the space. There's a void beyond both of those things that we've discussed in some of the other mythologies, and in this case, it's just a great root right now. We don't have an antithesis to that, but it fills the space, and then it starts creating offspring.
Yep.
So
and
this sounds,
again, so begins life.
So begins life. So this sounds kind of like maybe Aedra or Daedra, or maybe eventually the things that become mortals and those kinds of things. But here, let's keep going. Then Atak learned that there were things other than itself. Weird. They were just like Atak, but went a different way from it. Sometimes you get these lines in these texts that sound very vague, but are poignant. So went a different way from it. In my estimation, that means that they are fundamentally different and function in different ways, even though they are similar to the original thing.
Right. Which again kind of ties into a lot of the yin yang, Anu Padme thing we've seen so much, where it's like, well, there's, the light inversion and the dark. Well, okay, this again seems almost like a dichotomy. Like one is going one way, the other is going another way. This again kind of has this overarching theme that so many of these cultures kind of express through their documents.
Right. So we've got like chaos, or I guess order and chaos.
Order and chaos,
Padme, stasis and change. You have a lot of these dualities, right?
Yep.
Well, the very next sentence shows that there's a duality here. They saw and made strange new things that did not last except in how it changed them. So whatever this other thing was, it was changing and making changes and creating offspring or offshoots or other roots or however you want to describe that. But those things didn't last, but they did change the original source of those things over time. So that seems like an agent of chaos or change compared to something that is more stable, like Atak itself being a root that grows other roots.
Right.
Atak continued to grow until something came back from the nothing. Mysterious. It was like a root, but had scales and eyes and a mouth. It told Atak that it was called Kota, and it had been growing too. Not that it had a mouth, or now that it had a mouth, it was hungry. So we have That's a root.
Unsettling.
Yeah, and then something with scales, eyes, and a mouth. So it sounds very snake-like, very...
reptilian.
Reptilian, yeah. So we got kind of this thing going on here between a plant and a reptile that coincides a lot with Argonians and their understanding of their place in the world, being that they are reptiles in relation to the Hist. The Hist are trees, intelligent trees that are 100% very important in their culture. I mean,
pretty meaningful.
Pretty meaningful. We'll get into that a little bit more as we go. Here, let's move on. Atak named Kota for what it was. Serpent. Okay, so we have a serpent now. It put roots through the serpent's eyes, but Kota was old and strong like the root and had grown fangs while it was away. It bit Atak. They coiled around each other. From their struggle, new things came to be. Atak learned things Kota had learned, including hunger, and so it bit Kota back. They ate and roiled for so long they became one and forgot their conflict. How does this feel like Anu and Padme coming together?
Again, it's like this chaotic bond type of thing, which we see, again, very frequently. And even in, I guess you want to get real, like, fourth wall breaking, thinking about the game that it's from, which is kind of a pretty common symbol that most people realize now, and it's is the Ouroboros that connects to a lot of the Elder Scrolls lore and stuff like that now. And even that symbol is this like chaotic, each alliance was eating each other. That applies to so many things like this with their creation stories, where it's almost like, in the chaotic nature that they're kind of like messing with each other, they also bond and form all these other beings and offspring.
Yeah, through the violence, creation happens. It's
right.
This weird dichotomy.
It doesn't sound like the most peaceful way that things are coming together.
Right. And in this version, it is way less peaceful because you have these two things that become hungry and they start eating each other.
Literally trying to eat each other.
Right. Which is in some ways kind of similar yet different to mating. Because that's
all right.
But that's what the other myths talked about, right? The idea was that they come together and they create offspring, and so they basically create these families of children that then create their own children, and they descend from there. But in this case, it's more of they come together in this kind of struggle and conflict, and that's what becomes the creation of other things. Is through the eating of each other, and the bonding. They become one thing through this conflict and struggle, which is weird. But it's not so weird when you think of it from the perspective of like one is a plant, the other is an animal. Animals can eat plants, and of course serpents aren't necessarily vegetarians, but the idea that like an animal would eat a plant, but then if the animal dies, the plant then uses the nutrients of the dead thing to then grow itself some more. That like that symbiosis quality of plants and animals.
Yeah, it becomes a fertilizer.
Right. So there is a natural inherent symbiosis between plant and animal, and that's kind of what's happening here, sort of in a way.
Again, destruction and decay does end up leading to life over again, a la, Mehrunes Dagon and his whole existence.
Right. All right. So it goes on. It says, they shed their skin and severed their roots and called themselves Atak Kota. Atak Kota?
That sounds good. Atak Kota.
Sure. Close enough. But this is interesting. So this is important because this is going to come up some more. Shed their skin, severed their roots. They've transformed. They've done something else. The skin of the serpent, the scales, is something defining what they are and how they are different from the root thing. And severing the roots also defines what they are and makes them more similar to the other thing they were bonding with, the serpent, right? They're kind of getting rid of those things. But also the skin and the roots are pieces of them that now fall off and become other things. They're a form of creating a descendant or something that came from the greater whole that then still has the power to be something of itself. But then we get this part. They call themselves Atak Kota, who said maybe, in quotes. Now you might look at that and go, well, that's cute, I guess. Maybe. What does that mean?
That's cute.
I guess that's cute. Like, this is the one time they talk. They're one thing now, and they go, maybe. Like, I don't know. But that's not really what that means. What this is a reference to is the gray maybe of creation, or at least that's my interpretation.
No, that would be my thought as well, just because that's a phrase that's so ubiquitous. What the series, it seems a little bit on the nose that they would use maybe when the gray maybe is such a common thing.
Right. So I don't want to miss this. The comment from Summit the Dragon in chat says, one thing is that Atak and Kota seem to be genderless. They is used as opposed to the Khajiit lore. It seems like Fadume is described as feminine. What importance could this gender or lack thereof be? Who knows? Maybe that has something to do with the way they see gender in their own society. When it comes to the Khajiit, it seems like the Den Mother is an important figure in their society. So doing things from the perspective of a female seems important in that case. But in this case, they're without gender. It's as if the genders don't matter in this, or maybe genders haven't even been invented yet.
Right. So I think actually that might be a notable point, because that type of thing doesn't really matter as much in Argonian culture, because they can, they're a little more gender fluid with stuff, because with the reptilian nature, they seem to be able to shift to a lot of things with the influence of the Hist, which we'll get into, to be what they need to be regardless, whether it's jacked up and attacking Oblivion, whether it's just,
Right.
Finding ways to end up, mating and becoming what they need to do to produce more Argonians, whatever the situation seems to be. Argonians, there's a little bit to Argonians that's really different than the other races in the series. So I think that might be worth noting, because I think it's how little it matters is what makes it matter, if that makes sense. Yeah,
it is important to note that. That is a good point, Summit, because that is distinctly different from the other cultures who even like the Daedric princes, they all want to put a gender on them, even though they are actually without gender. They just represent themselves how they choose to mortals. Here, let's keep moving. It says, when Atak Kota said this, the skin it had shed knew itself. Okay.
Beautiful.
It ate the severed roots, and even though it was dead, it followed Atak Kota like a shadow. Shadows usually have something to do with the dark, the void, something like that. Do you have any sense of that in this one, Lotus?
Again, without jumping too far ahead, the idea of the shadow and the serpent are pretty intertwined with some of the specific tribes of Argonian, including being a shadow scale, depending upon which constellation is prevalent when they are born. And it kind of predetermines, hey, you're going to be a shadow scale. I hope you like being in the Dark Brotherhood, essentially.
Right.
And that's like a thing designed at birth, more or less. So this whole concept of that is 100% there. So that does seem, again, worth noting that it is specifically stated there. It's more than just a subtle, like, oh, this is just a set of words we threw in that don't really hold context. I think they're specifically chosen.
I think you could also draw a connection between this and Sithis, potentially.
Sure, 100%.
So you've got, like, think of the root and the serpent as Anu and Padume, right? And then they combine together, and then it sheds its skin and the roots break off. But the skin knows itself, which means it's self-aware. It is another acting entity. It eats the roots. It consumes things. It is like a shadow. It is a dark version of the thing. So it's almost like Anu and Padme creating Ariel, and then Sithis being associated with that. So there are some similarities here between this and the other versions of the mythology.
Yeah, for sure.
It goes on and says, Atak and Kota continued to roil. In each of its scales was a world that it devoured. But now Atak and Kota was not in conflict, and things had time to begin and end. Okay, this is adding stuff in real fast. Each of the scales is a world it devoured, which feels kind of like Kelpa's, almost like...
I was about to say, this really, when reading this prior to us doing this show, that one I was like, I actually did not really remember this book from ESO. I just read it in passing or forgot about it or missed this one or whatever. This just like reeks of Kelpa to me.
Yes, and there's more than just this, but this is the beginning of what feels like Kelpa. But this was just like,
oh, okay, this is almost like going on... the idea of Kalpas, which is interesting because when you think of Kalpas, which we haven't gotten to the Red Guards and the Cutans yet, that's more of their thing. So it's interesting that this is like an overlapping thing between those two cultures, which really aren't geographically close to each other.
Right. Yeah, but everything goes back to original source somewhere, I guess.
Exactly.
So Kelpas being cycles of reality, cycles of existence. There's different ways of framing that are, and it's all a little bit foggy, but this idea...
It gets a little weird, but like... existence starting anew, like there's different existences and like one becomes the next one.
Right. So think of this as like Atak and Kota roiled and went through this creation of worlds and then consumed the worlds and then made another world and consumed the world. And those become the scales that it devours and becomes part of who it is. And then it gets to this point where now Atak and Kota was not in conflict and things had time to begin and end. Time to begin and end feels like the beginning of Akatosh. It feels like time itself is now ordered and in a specific direction that we as mortals would be able to understand it. Again, drawing connections to the other myths. The shadow wished it could eat these things, but its belly was full of roots that were growing. So the shadow wanted to devour this new world, but it was too full and it was still making new things in its belly. Weird, but let's keep going. When the shadow could bear it no longer, it swam closer to Atak and Kota and spat out the roots. Now that its belly was empty, the shadow almost ate them again and everything else it saw, but it had come to see the roots as its own after carrying them. So instead it told them secrets and went to sleep. Okay, so again, just off of the words, you might be like, wait, what? So it goes over, it barfs up all the roots that it was eating. Then it's like, well, I'm hungry again. But it goes, oh, wait, these roots are actually kind of cute. I'm going to take care of them. I'm going to share some information. Now I'm all tuckered out. Time for bed.
No, I'm tuckered out from all this puking.
Yeah, so is that what's happening here?
I mean, that's a literal. It's a literal. That I feel is a bit too exact as to what it's doing. And in relation to, again, we tie these into the other things. In this situation, it's sort of like life is springing forward from it, and it's supposed to just like, okay, well, this is just a thing that exists. When you create this life, you kind of have an attachment to it, is what I see from this scenario, where it's like, okay, well, I made all these things. Well, hey, these things are like now my little kids. Like,
my little kids. I'm going to teach them stuff.
Like,
right. I'm going to teach them. They're going to learn. And so I think the scale of what we're talking about here is still like, these are not like, oh, a bunch of Argonians came out. No,
we haven't. These are godlike beings yet.
Yeah, these are godlike beings. And this could relate to something where people will often say things like the Daedric princes are padomaic. Yep. This idea that certain types of godlike beings come more from this darker descent. They come out of the shadow rather than out of the root. That may have something to do with this. And it doesn't specifically say names. It doesn't tell who or when.
It doesn't. And again, we haven't specifically gotten into the word hist yet. But since hists are essentially trees made of roots and stuff like that, I almost feel like since these things are so ancient, they have this weird sort of power that's never overtly shown in the games, but alluded to oftentimes.
Yeah.
They span ages, it seems like, and they have a lot to them, and there's some unsettling aspects to potentially them being really, really powerful, even though they're pretty much dormant. However, that's sort of more of what I thought with these, rather than like
it could be his. This could be the origins of the
just because that has a stronger tie than Adric beings or something like that. I just kind of assumed that was like, oh, these are like my little children, my little trees.
Yeah, maybe this is the root of the hists.
Root of the
like
situation.
The seeds that became the hists. Maybe that's it. Maybe that's what's going on.
That was my thoughts to it.
Right, because they are roots that are thrown up. Now, the next sentence is interesting too, because it says, the roots found others and told them how they had survived in the belly of the shadow and how they were still able to grow there. When they shared this knowledge with the others, it changed them, and they took on new forms with new names. That feels like communicating with Adric spirits or something like that, and saying like, hey, in fact, they may even relate to how do you stick around from one Kelpa to another? Well, you hide in the shadow's belly and you continue to grow.
Sure.
Something
and
like
we
that.
do know, whether for better or worse, if you think ESO is a tangent, get ready. In the novels,
yes, which is a great source for Argonian lore. Absolutely.
Yes, and kind of alludes to some of the lesser talked about traits of the Hist, but there is Hist Daedric ties in certain scenarios, which some of the Hists don't seem to like anymore. So it wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility for them to remember some stuff of dealing with them and, knowing how to make a connection with things like Daedric princes again.
Yeah, I mean, that could be a part of it as well. A lot of this is speculative because we are at a point in the mythology where there really isn't that much else to say or draw these connections to. There's just a lot of speculation and how to understand this. Like the next sentence that says, some of these spirits wanted to keep the names and forms they had chosen, but they had learned them through the shadow, and it was not in all of them, making them temporary. They learned of hunger and conflict, and they learned of fear, change, and called it death. This feels like the beginnings of mortals, or at least
I was going to say mortality as a concept.
Mortality, the earth bones, the giving of yourself to the point where you don't have anything else to give, and so therefore you expire, you run out of energy. Right,
you're not necessarily infinite.
Yeah. Summit says Lorcan. I'm not sure that's a direct relation to that specific sentence, but maybe.
So to Summit's point, again, sort of the idea, again, Summit, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but like one of the things that I could easily see being kind of tied into Lorcan is this idea of bringing these things forward that then kind of act on their own. Which is something that bothered, a lot of the other beings when Lorcan basically made, men. It's like, they can do their own thing. You're not making men in this scenario, but as a parallel, it's like you're bringing forth these, I will just call them little roots, whatever they actually are, whether they're Hist or not.
Yeah.
It's like, are they not kind of following suit the way they might have been expected? Is it that whole element of free will type of thing? I could see that possibly tying in the same type of way that Lorcan brought that to men.
Right, or just the nature of Nirn being something that's temporary
and not really predictable in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, let's keep moving. These spirits were angry and afraid, but the roots showed the spirits ways between places from when Atak had made paths out of nothing. They could use these riverways to hide from death. So the same kind of idea of like hiding in the shadow's belly, using these other paths, or and like you were saying before, we'll get to Yakuden lore probably next week, or maybe 2 weeks
that might
from
be
now
the
after
next one we
patron
tackle.
chat.
We'll see. We still got some more cultures to tackle.
Right, and we got patron chat coming up. But this idea of moving sideways between the Kelpas, that's what that feels like. The spirits were content and set about to make things that looked like them and shared in their aspects and loved them. They kept growing until they were as big as Kota, and they forgot it came before them and that it had a shadow that was sleeping. So this is weird. It's like you got this other thing. They make other smaller things. And this feels, again, like mortals that love them and respect them. The spirits kept growing until they were as big as Kota. So those spirits become more powerful through this somehow. But then they forget what came before them and that there was a shadow that was sleeping. It's almost like the Adric spirits or the Hist or whoever create offspring. They become very powerful because of the love and worship of these creatures that are underlings to them, and yet forget that, like, oh no, there's a Kelpic cycle and there are these even greater things out there which will consume all of the world in reality and move on. So surprise.
That's a thing, though, that also you see happen, whereas it's, what's that phrase? Absolute power corrupts absolutely, or whatever. As things become strong and relationally, it's like, oh, well, look at all the things that I'm more powerful than. So you start getting like, okay, yeah, no, look at all. But oftentimes you'll forget your roots. Yeah, we brought it in again. Where did you get your start? People forget what it's like before they got stronger, and it's hard for a lot of people to relate to that.
It's a hubris sort of thing. Also,
it is 100%.
Also, you know that saying of it's similar to this. There's always somebody cooler.
Yes.
Right? Like, okay, maybe in a room of like your friends, you're like the cool friend, right?
Right.
But then you head out to the bar and you're like, okay, that guy at the bar is definitely way cooler than I am.
It's like, I'm a huge tool.
Right. And then that guy's like, yeah, I'm the coolest guy at the bar. And then all of a sudden a movie star shows up at the bar and everyone's like, well, clearly you're not as cool as freaking Keanu Reeves over there. It's like, okay, there's always, but as long as Keanu Reeves isn't in the room, you're like, well, I'm as cool as it gets. I'm the best one, right? But
it's all relational.
Right. All right, so let's keep going. In time, the worlds were too big and there was no more room. Again, the spirits went to the roots to ask for more, but the roots had gone to sleep, content with what they had made because it changed so often that it did not need to grow. So the shadow goes to sleep, the roots go to sleep, everybody's chilled. They're like, hey, it's fine. You just keep changing. You don't need to grow. That's just the way reality works, is change, which of course leads to death, which is part of that cycle. So it seems like the roots were happy with that. And now that I said roots multiple times, I'm thinking like the band, The Roots, but that's not who we're talking about. So the Roots are the Argonian creation myth. They didn't know.
Right, you know what? They got some sweet albums. I'm down with that.
There you go. Did you want to add something else before?
No, I was going to say we can just move on after the Roots reference on that one.
Right. Okay. So the spirits grew so desperate and hungry that they tore at Kota's skin and drank of its blood. They ate until they broke Kota, and that Atak remembered growing, and Kota remembered being nothing. There was conflict again, and from the spirits, Atak and Kota learned about death with a capital D. So there was violence, blood, and sap. Few things here. The spirits become all uppity and they start attacking the thing that created them, Kota, right? But they start consuming it. Notice that they're drinking of its blood. They're taking its fluid, its energy from it because they want more than what they are supposed to have, right? They become greedy and gluttonous. Yeah. And then that kind of does this thing where like Atak breaks apart and Atak Kota breaks apart. Atak remembers growing because that was Atak's main quality. Kota remembered being nothing. So now not only is this telling us that Kota wasn't just some other thing that always existed and they just found each other. Kota actually came from nothing.
Right.
Which seems reasonable to assume, but it does not say that Atak came from nothing. Atak seems to have always been.
Right.
So those are two they are different in those fundamental ways, which go back to like Anu and Padme. This idea of like chaos and order, something and nothing, that kind of thing. So then the spirits get all uppity still, and Atak and Kota learn about death. There was violence, blood, and sap. I think there's probably something in there about they learn about death as not just I'm consuming a thing and then spitting it back out and creating this Kelpa cycle.
Right, more of like an ending to mortality in this situation. Like there's a potential ending. It's like you might have a finite destination here. I
also think that maybe this is another clue among these other creation myths that this version of reality is different from the previous Kelpas. You get that sense.
I would agree with that.
Yeah, it's something that feels hinted. I can't think of specific examples, but it's something that absolutely feels hinted at in the other myths. But even in things like Alduin showing up in Skyrim and suppose his job is freaking to end the world.
Yeah,
and then he doesn't. Or Mehrunes, and we talk about this all the time. Mehrunes Dagon showing up in Oblivion. His job is to end the world, and he doesn't.
Right. Things keep blocking this Kalpa from ending. Right. And it's a weird situation of you, the player, have the agency to prevent the world from ending.
Which seems like something that doesn't happen. It seems like it's always a surprise. Like,
right.
Dagon is like, wait a minute, you stopped me from doing this? That's not supposed to happen, you know?
Right. Which is also weird it makes you initially appear as the hero, and you very well might be, but anybody who is now not created as a result of this cycle ending and a new cycle beginning would not view you as a hero. You just screwed everything up.
Yeah. And maybe things just keep getting worse. I mean, that is one of the theories, and I don't want to rabbit trail too much on this.
Yeah, no, we should, because we can go off in a lot of directions in this.
But now that we've gone, okay, so from the order that things happen in game, we've got ESO, which is in the second era, right? Then you have some of the other games. Then you get to Oblivion. Then you get to Skyrim. And playing Skyrim so much over the last decade and a half, you kind of forget what things were like in Oblivion. And now that Oblivion has already been remastered and it comes out again, everyone plays Oblivion. One of the things that a lot of people have noted online is, hey, wait a minute, the technology in Oblivion seems more advanced than that in Skyrim. Weird, right? Like people are starting to notice these things. It's almost as if technology is going backwards. Magic
there's some degradation from games to game.
Right. Magic seems to be declining. This seems like it's an intentional design, not just you could chalk it up to, well, the developers just like this aesthetic, so they went more.
There is some fourth wall breaking where there are some physical limitations of the production of it, but this series also does a great job of using those physical limitations to craft the world.
Right. So maybe there's something about Kelpas like declining over time and things just keep getting worse. And they will continue to do so the longer that people
keep intervening.
Or
that's
at least,
kind of a neat idea. It's like, is it just things just getting crappier and crappier as you go? And it's just like, oh boy, we're really getting backwards now.
Right. It's weird. And crappier, I mean like the difference between Roman influenced armor and things like that, as opposed to the Nordic more I don't know, the quality of the buildings, the quality of the armor, that kind of stuff in Skyrim appears to be a technological decline from where things were previously.
Sure. And I mean, in the grand scheme of things, we had a race of Dwemer who were making essentially robots. And at this point, we have some people, becoming Magister, then they can cast like Spark.
Right.
Just really just like the quality seems to be going down. So I can see what you're saying in a lot of ways. Yeah.
Maybe that's the thing. Now, who knows? Maybe by the time Elder Scrolls 6 comes out, the aesthetic is completely different again. It's really just about the different areas of the world and the ways that they do things or something like that. Who knows? Maybe that'll completely throw this idea out the window. But I guess we'll find out in a few years whenever it comes out. But here, let's keep moving. In the chaos, the spirits were lost and afraid, so they ate others and themselves. They drank the blood and sap. Blood and sap are interchangeable here because everything's either plant or animal.
Right.
And they, or at least in the framing of this narrative. And they grew scales and fangs and wings. And these spirits forgot why they had made anything other than to eat it. This sounds like, let's make a bunch of plants and animals and then we can just farm them.
Yeah, we just have everything we need. We're just now self-sufficient. We're making things so that we can continue on.
Right, which seems very selfish. It's not like I'm creating children to then teach things and to live their own lives and make their own free decisions. This is more of I'm creating animals and creatures because I need more blood and sap to consume.
Right.
Those are two very different kinds of things. There were other spirits that still clung to what they were and what they had made. A forest spirit came and saw that the roots loved their children like she loved hers, so she taught them to walk and talk. They told her secrets with new words, and she sang the song back to them. The roots woke up when they heard this and joined with the forest. This is one of the coolest parts of this entire thing, because that forest spirit, at least in my understanding of this, my interpretation, is probably Ifre, the spirit that's worshipped by the Bosmer, their progenitor, basically, the forest spirit among forest spirits. And this one realizes that the roots have children like Ifre's children, the Bosmer, and Ifre then engages with those children to teach them to walk and to talk, to learn their language, to get up and walk around and move around. Ifre is a combination, basically, of Ifre and the Hist creating the Argonians together. Or
Right.
at least the Hist creating them and Ifre uplifting them to the status that is very similar to the other intelligent mortal beings.
Right. And I always view this as like, it's super like demeaning sounding, but it's just like, when I think of this, it always struck me as like they were made as tools to the Hist, and then Ifre gives them the ability to be something more.
Yeah, that's exactly what this feels like. Was that
like that's just
right.
it. It's just
they
like,
would have
well,
just
no, they
been
need
little
more
plants,
meaning.
little seeds, little variations of Hist, little tiny Hist saplings or something, and they would have just done what the Hist wanted them to do, and just grew and consumed or whatever.
Which in some extreme situations seems to also still sort of be
Yes.
what the Hist wants them to do, but it seems more of it requires a concerning situation that the Hist deems the need to intervene for probably self-preservation, and then it kind of reverts the Argonians to this more simplistic, like, no, we need you to do this. Like, again, referring to Oblivion with the Oblivion Crisis, not in the game, after the game happens, when all the different groups are fighting back against the portals.
Right.
And, the Argonians basically get all juiced up, go in and clean house and have the portals close them in because the Daedra don't want anything to do with that. And they're just like, we are getting stomped in our own homeland. This is not how this is supposed to go.
Right.
That's like a situation where it felt like the Hist were intervening for self-preservation and sort of called in the troops. It's like, no. You need to go back to doing what we tell you for a moment. Like, then you can go back to your own thing.
Yeah, Hist sap fed Argonians. That's a weird sentence to say.
It sure is.
Function differently than other Argonians. Argonians that are not raised on the Hist sap do not respond to the Hist the way that the Argonians who do get raised on Hist sap respond. And in some ways, some interpretations are, well, they just have control of their minds. If the Hist want to enact something that forces all the Argonians to do what they want, they could. And that seems kind of scary. But I guess the tamer interpretation is that the Hist, communicated what needed to be happen and the Argonians agreed to do it. They still had agency. Which one's the version that happened? I don't know that we know for sure.
Right.
So one of those is way scarier than the other. I guess we'll have to wait and find out if that gets fleshed out anymore. We have just a few more sentences, so let's wrap this up. The roots saw that Kota's blood had made oceans and Atak's sap had made stones, and each of these spirits had never known the shadow. The roots knew what this would mean and asked the shadow to protect its children. So it's as if the foundations of reality come from Kota and Atak specifically, rather than from, say, the Aedra giving of themselves to create creation and the El Nofei and the Earthbones and those like becoming parts of Nirn and all of that, as we see in other things. But also that there's definitely a distinction between Kota and Atak and the shadow, and the shadow is protecting the children by the roots, the Argonians. So the roots here are Argonians, according to this interpretation, and they reached out to the shadow to protect them so that mommy and daddy wouldn't come and get them. It seems to be the implication here.
Pretty much.
So the next thing that happens, the shadow woke. Remember, it was asleep. It looked upon Kota and Atak and saw how different the nothing had become and how it was becoming the same as before. They've kind of gone back to that separated from each other kind of thing. It remembered it was the skin of Kota, and it was bigger than Kota or Atak alone. So it decided it would eat them both. Because the shadow came from the union of the two rather than the two individually. Now the shadow can go back and eat them. And it did. The shadow ate the snake and the root and the sap and stone and the oceans of blood and all of the spirits. It had eaten everything before it remembered the roots that were its children, so it looked unto itself to find them. When the shadow saw this, it remembered that it was a skin of something that came before, and it had eaten what came after, and this would be an end that always was. So this seems to show that it almost feels like when you're reading something like the book of Revelation in the Bible, where it's like, okay, these things are things that will come to pass, but they haven't yet. This idea of this feels like it's written in past tense, and that's not similar to Book of Revelation, but it feels like this is written in past tense, but it's more prophetic, if that makes sense. Yeah. Like this is what will happen, or we're in the process of this happening, and this is how everything resolves and ends at the end of everything.
I could see that, and you know, prophecy isn't totally unheard of in the series, especially when you have like fate as being a potential determining factor to how things play out. So I could see that, yeah. But
maybe it's also not predictive of what's happening in the future. Maybe the other version of this is that it is actually still in the past, and the reason why Nirn is different from these other Kelpas or whatever is because the shadow eats Kota and Atak and
maybe
protects the children, the roots. And the very final sentence of this is, and so the shadow shed its skin, even though that was all it was. And it fell like a shroud over the roots, promising to keep them safe within its secrets. Weird, because it's as if it sheds itself and is no longer there, but it, in doing so, creates a protection over its children. One part of this makes me feel like this is the same way in the Khajiit lore, that it's like the Khajiit explanation for everything basically just reduces to, and that's why we're so awesome. Right. This kind of feels like the Argonian version of that. Like, well, and the shadow shed its skin over itself, and so it gave itself up in order to protect us, and that's why we're special people.
Right. We're chosen because of this.
Yes, that's kind of how that feels. From a metaphysical standpoint, I'm not really sure what this means. I don't have a good grasp of why this is the way it is and is described the way it is, because it doesn't feel like a complete good ending that wraps. It seems like the shadow just kind of eats everything, which means all the other godlike beings that got too big for their britches and Nirn itself and everything. And yet we're now after that. So maybe all of existence is like inside the belly of the shadow currently.
Well, that's just it. To me, at least, and, you know, I'd be curious to see if other people have thoughts on this, but I think the Khajiit analogy is the best one, because I actually think that has a lot of parallels to this, where this is the reason we're special. Like, we're all part of this. This is, you know, where we are now. But because we're still around, it's because we're worth keeping around. So this is sort of like, this is why we maintain, because, you know, here's the reason we're great type of deal, because
But what about everything else, right?
It's just, it's their type of deal, which I guess in a lot of situations, being that Argonians do have a lot of, even though they're pretty just zen and doing their own thing, that has a lot of implications where they're kind of oppressed in a lot of ways. It almost sounds like a way to essentially keep up morale, even if it doesn't necessarily sync along with what's happening.
Yeah, I have to wonder. I think there's probably some interpretations here that are missing from this conclusion. I think that there's probably some things that coming at this from a non-Argonian person were kind of missing, if that makes sense.
I definitely could agree with that.
So that's kind of how that ends for me. Now, notice that it doesn't mention Aedra or Daedra. It doesn't mention a lot of the things that the other versions of creation myths mention, but it does have kind of parallels or analogs in certain ways. But that's about, there's really nothing else. We can't say okay, well, who is Akatosh? We don't really know.
We don't really know. They don't name their gods like that. It's just these, the trees that provide us life.
Right.
That's really sort of it.
Yeah. Yeah. And so looking at this backwards, that makes sense because for Argonians, trees and their existence and the importance of what they're doing among their own society and their history is what's most important. So those are the things they're addressing in the story.
Right. And one thing I think is probably worth noting as well, and it's more so related to, it's a bit of a mix with the actual climate they live in. Argonians don't overall have a strong self interest in their own history. Everything is just temporary, which is kind of alluded to a few different times that we've talked about. But maintaining records of your historical documents and where you came from and all of that isn't that important to them. And the reason that's kind of, I feel, worth noting is they don't care about their structures. They fall into ruin, they just move on, or they build something on top of it. That's part of their culture.
It's all very transient. It's all about now.
It is.
And it's about relations and not the past.
Correct.
It's about what's happening now. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's a little more unique to them for the sole reason of where they live has a real hard time allowing permanence, because Black Marsh is just, it's a swampy, it's super humid. All of these things cause, breakdown of stuff, and things sink into the marshes and the bogs and stuff like that. So it's hard to make anything made to last, essentially. Yeah. So that became part of their culture. So the fact that this sort of drifts off at the end and it's just and that's where we are now, almost aligns with that thought process that they have throughout the series and stuff like that, where it's kind of just we're just here. We're here in the now. Now is what matters, whatever.
Yeah, we are the special people of the Hist, and the shadow protects us, and so we live our lives.
Right. Here's some of the stuff we remember. Right. If it's not exact, it doesn't really.
Right. What else do you need? Just live your life.
What else do you need?
Right. Yeah, there's definitely that kind of feel to it. So there you go. That's Children of the Roots. I hope that was enlightening in some ways and probably also raised a bunch of other questions. So if you have any other questions,
sure it did.
Let us know. You can chime in on our Discord page or wherever. All of that stuff is available. But we're going to take a quick break, and then we will be back because we've got to thank our patrons. We've got the random page of the week. We've got some other stuff to wrap up, so don't go anywhere.
This is Hamis Morak, Dragonborn, and you are educating yourself to the Elder Scrolls Lorecast.
So Lotus, we have a brand new patron who's also a Daedric Prince who's going to get shout-outs every week along with our other Daedric Princes. So for their first shout-out, simply because they signed up, because everyone gets a shout-out when they signed up, Baron von Gingy
Love the name. And also thank you.
Thank you so much. Welcome to the Patreon. Thank you for your support. Also, I have to shout out our Daedric princes, including Baron Von Gingy, who I will get to say over and over. I'm very excited about this. Blinding Vision, Hirsine, Kirasi, Mothman, and Peter R. Thank you so much. You are the group that gets the shout outs every week. But of course, thank you to all 183 of our current patrons.
Wow.
That's insane. Thank you.
Thank you all. Holy oof. That is very humbling. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah. Thanks for keeping the show going. You guys are the best.
Yeah.
We couldn't do it without you.
I really appreciate that.
Yeah. And also, if you want to help us out in other ways, you can leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. If I can see it here in the US, I'll read it out on a future episode. We don't have any new ones this week, but that means if you leave one this week, we'll probably see it next week. Also, speaking of Patreon, patreon.com/Elder Scrolls Lorecast. That's where you go check out all the stuff. You get ad-free episodes. You get, let's see what else. There's stickers and t-shirts. You can join us for our patron chats. Our patron chat is coming up next week on the 26th. So if you'd like to be...
How is it already the last week of June?
It's just time just goes. It's just, this is how time works, I guess. I don't know. Take it up with I was going to say Alduin, but that's not right because it's Akatosh.
No, don't do that.
It's the other name that starts with an A. Don't talk to Alduin about it because he will just blow you apart with fire or something.
Take it up with Akatosh. That's fine. Do not take it up with Alduin because you only take it up once.
Nope. It's like when you were a little kid and you knew who to go to for certain questions. Like, oh, mom will be happier about this question, or dad will want. So you pick and choose. Anyway, come join us and sign up on the Patreon. You can help pick out what we're going to talk about for the patron chat this upcoming week. And also, we do all sorts of fun stuff. So go check that stuff out. But Lotus, are you ready for our random UESP page?
Let's random it up.
I hit the button. I've got it right here. This is a Elder Scrolls Online thing. That seems good.
Okay, so it tracks with what we were using our reading from.
Yep. So it says Elder Scrolls Online furnishings workshop materials, and we mentioned Dwemer earlier. These are dwarven spider legs, inoperative. These are the ones that are broken.
About that technology degrading.
Yeah, right. Available from, and then it has these little details here. This furnishing is a luxury item. Luxury items are a week/year rotation. Once a week, the luxury furnisher appears with a set of wares which rotate each week and ultimately may not have been seen. There's missing somebody needs to edit this wiki.
May not have been seen
again for 1 year. There are a few exceptions to the rotation, given that there may be events and new releases that disrupt the usual wear list for a week. Visit the Zenel Theron in the Zenel Theron. Somebody needs to update this.
I was going to say, remind me of this later so I can just do a little spot treat of this page.
Just go poke at it a little bit and move some words around.
I'll do a little editing. Just remind me of that after the show. I'll go edit that a little.
Yeah, visit Zenel Theron in Cold Harbor's The Hollow City every Friday night after 8 p.m. Eastern to view the weekly luxury furnishings. This is from Update 25 in February 2020.
Ta-da.
No player houses come with this furnishing. Did you know that?
I don't know. It seems like broken Dwemer legs are... Really, they'd be in just such high demand.
Yeah. So here's the real question: how much do you think broken dwarven spider?
35,000 gold.
Oh, you already know.
No, is that right?
Yeah, this is absolutely right. That is spot on. Luxury furniture for 35,000 gold.
Wow, that's actually...
No, I'm sorry. 3,500. It was 3,500.
Okay, all right. No, I had too many zeros. I was saying 35,000.
We were off by 10.
Okay,
10 times.
all right. So I overshot it by 1 0. I was like, wait a minute, you're going to be kidding me. No, I'm actually not looking at this page. Okay. So
when you said that, I was like, 3,500? That's the same number. And I'm like, wait, no, it's 100, not 1,000. So,
okay, all right. I overpriced it by a magnitude of 10.
I was like, holy crap. You know how much broken spider legs cost.
I built my house out of them now.
There you go. So that's it. Dwarven spider legs and a bunch of weird Argonian lore. We'll be back next week with our patron chat, and we'll then continue on with some other crazy lore stuff because there's definitely some other creation stories that we haven't covered yet. Yakuta, we're coming. Don't worry. I'm holding off on you because it's
Yakuta,
super weird and super cool, but we'll get there eventually. But until then, Lotus, do you have anything else going on you want to share?
No, not really. Ideally, we're setting aside some time so we can record another episode of Tales of Tamriel presented by UESP this weekend, as console got our new version of the ESO update where we get the new style of releases with the seasonal model. I still don't feel seasonal is a great way that they phrased it, but I don't know. I'm not on their marketing team, so what are you going to do? However, that landed on console, so I've gotten to make myself a bit sleep deprived playing it last night when I really, really should have been sleeping. I was running around leveling up different skill lines for things because now they've kind of unshackled the traditional class system and made it a lot more freeform, which a lot of people like, some people not as much of a fan. I think it's much more in line with Elder Scrolls games as a whole, where you can choose a skill line. You choose your skill lines that make your class.
Right, rather than the class defining that you can't do certain things.
Correct.
Right.
And this really seems to open the door to you can make your class a lot of different things, which I have already loved because my Dragon Knight is now running around with a needless amount of obnoxious summons, and it's great.
Nice. So you went summons, and I went Nightblade, who's normally like shoot my bow and then stab things to, just laser beams. I'm just going to laser beam everything.
You are a literal firework out in the field.
I'm going to poison you a little bit. I'm going to poison this whole group a little bit. Laser beams!
Yeah.
That's it.
Another hand touches the beacon.
That's what I do. So cool. Well, I'm going to try to spend more time getting into that as well. I haven't been able to explore the new zone very much lately because I've been doing other things, but I need to make that a priority. I need to get back into checking out the stuff that I haven't seen yet in the game. So that's coming up for me as well. Also, there's all sorts of other shows on the network. Robotsradio.net. You can check out my Fallout Lorecast, my Lord of the Rings Lorecast. You can check out a bunch of other shows about lore and all sorts of things. Go check it out. Robotsradio.net, or join us on the Discord and just say hi and chat. There's lots of nice people over there. In fact, it's one of the best Discord channels you can. I'm not just saying this because it's our Discord channel. I've had multiple people throughout the years say, "Holy crap, everyone here is so nice. How did that happen? How come this isn't full of stupid garbage like everywhere else on the internet?" And it's like, well, because these are awesome people.
There are those little pockets where it's actually fun to be still.
Yep. So that's there if you want it. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Chat, thank you for being here. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week. And we'll see you next time with our patrons. See you later.
Yeah. Don't lick too much Hist sap.
Don't lick too much Hist sap and try to eat things too much so you get so full and then big and then the shadow eats you.
Forget where you came from? Where are we going with this?
Oh, man. All right.
Hit
Bye.
the button.
Bye, everyone. See ya. Thanks for tuning in to the Elder Scrolls Lorecast. Check out robotsradio.net for more podcasts just like this, and join us on the Robots Radio Discord. Be part of a community of over 5,000 people who are excited about video games and so much more. Robots Radio. Games, lore, stories, community. Just press play.